What if a single Ukrainian jet could erase a $50 million Russian command center in just 6 seconds? At 10:03 a.m., a MiG-29 roared across the Dnipro front at treetop level, flying so low its exhaust scorched the wheat below. Its mission, simple on paper, suicidal in reality, was to strike a grain silo turned into Russia's largest drone operations hub. One mistake, one blink, and the pilot would vanish into static and smoke. But this time, Ukraine's engineers had rewritten the rules of survival. A Soviet-built fighter, carrying a Western-made precision weapon, fused by sheer ingenuity. In the next few minutes, the radar networks would awaken, missiles would scream, and one pilot's heartbeat would decide the fate of an entire air grid. Stay with me, because once you see what happened at 10:14 a.m., you'll understand how intelligence, not firepower, wins wars. At 10:03 a.m., a Ukrainian MiG-29 thundered across the front line near Novokakhovka, hugging the earth at 45 feet so close the wheat bent under its weight. The mission read like a cold calculation. Destroy a grain silo the Russians had gutted and rebuilt into a $48 million drone C-2 hub, the nerve center that had launched dozens of strikes all week. For the first heartbeat, the world held. Green fields, gray sky, the MiG, a silver blade cutting through morning fog. Then, the air changed. From a camouflaged berm, an Igla spat fire. One missile, a screaming white streak accelerating past Mach 2. The pilot slammed the stick left, then ripped it right, threading the jet through the missile's vapor trail and forcing an overshoot. No relief. 3 more Iglas erupted in under 4 seconds, each launched from different checkpoints, an improvised net thrown up against him. Smoke columns braided the sky like luminous beacons. His SPO-15 Beriosa stayed stubbornly silent. These old radars don't hear. Heat-seeking whispers. He felt the world tilt as he pulled a 9G brake. Pressure hammered his chest. Stars flared at the edges of sight. Every violent turn chewed to 180 pounds of fuel. His internal tanks held 6,900 pounds. Do the math. Another 30-odd hard turns, and he'd be flying on fumes over enemy territory. Bullets stitched the air behind him. Roof-mounted man-pads on a nearby factory opened up with rapid-fire volleys. Tracer lines stitched the horizon. A Pantsir operator called in a vector. A P-18 VHF pinged a fleeting contact 12 kilometers ahead. Information cascaded, and suddenly every Russian pocket from Kherson to the riverbank knew where to place their guns. He dropped lower, to 40 feet, threading the maze of power lines at 560 knots, altimeter whining a desperate alarm. The silo, his target, loomed ahead, half hidden in grain dust and early smoke. In the cockpit, instruments flashed. Outside, the enemy painted the sky with death. At 10:11 a.m., the MiG broke from the tree line and began its ascent. The pilot knew he had less than 90 seconds before the entire southern defense grid locked him in. His instruments flickered. The Krasuka 4 jammer was already clawing at the GPS feed. Yet inside the weapons bay, a single JDAM ER waited. 505 pounds of tritonal engineered for one purpose: to erase that Russian drone hub from the map. He flipped the store's management switch, rerouting power through a Ukrainian-built pylon adapter, an improvised digital bridge between Soviet steel and American code. Battery charge. 27 minutes. IONS gyros, spinning at 24,000 revolutions per minute. Good. He entered the climb at 540 knots, afterburners igniting with 36,600 pounds of thrust. The MiG became a spear of fire. At 10:12 a.m., the first Tor M2 radar sweep found him. 20 kilometers out, a 9M331 missile spinning up. Every second now was borrowed time. The pilot felt his suit compress under 5.8 Gs, lungs burning as altitude spooled upward. 12,000 feet, 13,000, 400, 14,000, 900. Stall warning screamed at 185 knots. He had exactly 4 seconds to drop the weapon. JDAM, armed, he muttered. The pickle switch clicked. A metallic jolt ran through the airframe as the bomb fell away, wings snapping open with a hiss of vapor. It immediately caught the wind and began its 38-mile glide toward the silo. Below, the Russian fire control radar painted his jet. Lock confirmed. A Tor missile erupted, slicing skyward at Mach 2.5. The pilot rolled inverted and dove, flares exploding behind him like dying suns. The missile veered wide. Shockwave buffeted the canopy. From above, the JDAM streaked on, silent, merciless, its course unbroken. If you were watching that blip vanish off radar, knowing your bomb was still gliding toward a $50 million command center, would you risk one more dive to make sure it hit? Or trust the math and run for your life? As the MiG's dot climbed off most tactical displays, the occupied ground snapped awake. The P-18 VHF radar, old, hulking, and cruelly effective at low frequencies, gave a steady whisper that blossomed into a roar. Fleeting returns aligning into a vector heading toward the silo. Within 90 seconds, Pantsir crews were alerted. A mid-tier command post began shifting its fire control assets. Krasuka 4 spiked the air with broadband noise, choking the L1, L2 GPS channels. The bomb's satellite count tumbled from 8 to 4. Onboard INS hummed harder, carrying the calculation burden. Engineers had promised the JDAM-ER could hold 12 meters CEP for up to 2 minutes on INs alone. Numbers that now read like a lifeline. Meanwhile, thermal and mid-IR seekers in the newest Igla variants were recalibrating to resist flares, boasting terminal guidance improvements of plus 27% over decade-old models. The Tor M2 fire control radar slotted into search mode, then snapped into track, its array spinning. Electronic intent. Operators frantically cycled modes. The system went from cold to hot in under 180 seconds. Able to designate and engage multiple targets simultaneously. A cluster of command radars shifted frequencies, painting the sky with beams that tasted like metal on the pilot's helmet. Radio chatter grew granular. Vectors, bearing corrections, estimated intercept windows. The MiG's SPO-15 began to chirp again, this time not with the polite whisper of search, but the hard, insistent tone that precedes lock. The pilot's options narrowed into a line: commit to the profile the weapon required, or break off and surrender the strike. Below, the JDAM glided on. Its flight profile, a calculation of wind, drag, and a disrupted satellite feed, tense engineering ballet against a hunting network now fully awake. At 10:13 a.m., the Tor M2 fired. A single 9M331 missile erupted from its cold canister with a metallic howl, accelerating to 850 meters per second in less than 2 heartbeats. The Russian operator kept the lock through a flickering command uplink, updating intercept data 10 times per second. Inside the MiG, the SPO-15 turned from steady tone to shrill scream. He was being tracked. Hard. The pilot kept his hands frozen, resisting the instinct to jink. The JDAM-ER needed 2.5 more seconds of stable flight before clean separation data confirmed. At 15,100 feet, airspeed fell below 190 knots, barely above stall. The missile closed from 11 kilometers, guidance lines tightening into a perfect convergence. Then, at the exact second the bomb's green light blinked, separation confirmed. He threw the MiG inverted and pulled through into a dive so steep it flattened his vision to gray. 6 cartridges of radar chaff burst behind him, forming a 90-meter reflective cloud. The missile, now in terminal phase, lost its uplink for 0.4 seconds, enough for its guidance to overshoot. It detonated 340 meters off his port wing, the shockwave slamming the cockpit like a hammer. A tungsten fragment punched through the right engine compressor. Exhaust temperature spiked 300 degrees Celsius in 2 seconds. He throttled back and shut it down, flying on one engine, 41 miles deep in hostile airspace. Below, anti-aircraft guns began to trace red arcs through the smoke, and every radar dish within 50 miles tilted up, locking on. The strike had been made. But now came the harder part: surviving the way home. At 10:14 a.m., the JDAM-ER entered its terminal dive. Traveling at 290 meters per second, it sliced through the haze with the precision of a scalpel and the weight of vengeance. Inside the weapon's guidance core, its inertial sensors tracked every shift in air density, correcting glide vectors 20 times per second. Even without GPS, its error margin was less than 11 meters, enough to hit a window, not just a building. The Russian command center below had no idea. Operators were busy calling in vectors for the crippled MiG when their own radar screens flickered white. A half-second later, the bomb punched through the grain silo's upper dome at 605 miles per hour, shearing through 2 meters of reinforced concrete and 3 floors of steel trusses before the fuse delay timer reached 0. The explosion converted 450 pounds of tritonal, a mix of TNT and powdered aluminum, into an instant fireball of 2,900 degrees Celsius. The pressure wave hit 310 pounds per square inches at 10 meters, vaporizing machinery, drone, racks, and the concrete core itself. 8,200 tons of structure collapsed vertically, each floor hammering the next with gravitational acceleration. From the first impact to total implosion, 6 seconds flat, a rolling plume of dust and fire ballooned 500 feet into the sky, visible from Ukrainian positions across the river. Secondary explosions cascaded through the ruins as stored drone fuel, lithium packs, and Igla munitions cooked off, their chain reactions doubling the blast radius. Every Russian frequency monitoring the region went silent for 7 full minutes, a blackout across the southern air grid. The $48 million command center, once directing hundreds of UAV sorties, now existed only as a cratered scar beneath a drifting column of smoke. High above, the MiG limped home on one engine, its hydraulic pressure fading fast, but its mission complete. At 10:17 a.m., the MiG turned west, one engine dead, hydraulics failing, fuel down to 1,300 pounds. The cockpit smelled of hot metal and ozone. Warning lights flickered like dying stars. Every kilometer felt like a countdown. Below, the countryside stretched out in pale gray, scattered with smoke pillars and tracer arcs. Russian gunners were still firing blindly, trying to hit the ghost they thought was still inbound. He dropped to 500 feet, skimming the Dnipro's surface at 460 knots. The backup hydraulic system gave him barely 30% control authority. Each roll demanded the strength of his entire body. A Cu-23 emplacement opened up near Hola Priston, its twin barrels pumping 1,800 rounds per minute into the sky. The MiG's sonic wake shredded their aim, shockwaves rippling like distorted heat across their optics. Then, silence. No radar tones, no tracers, just the hum of the surviving RD-33 engine pushing him toward the horizon. At 10:23 a.m., the MiG crossed back into Ukrainian airspace with 82 kilograms of fuel, remaining less than 2 minutes of flight time. Behind him, Russian air defenses were blind, their coordination grid shattered. What had begun as one low-level strike had collapsed an entire network of command, drones, and radar. One jet, one pilot, one bomb, and an empire of signals gone. By 10:23 a.m., the MiG-29 was nothing more than a fading dot on Ukraine's radar, one engine out, wings riddled with holes, but still flying. Behind him, a column of smoke rose over Kherson like a monument to precision. In under 20 minutes, a single aircraft had collapsed. A drone command empire worth $48 million blinded an entire defense grid and rewritten the balance of electronic warfare on the southern front. That day wasn't just about destruction, it was about evolution. Ukraine had fused East and West, turning old Soviet steel into a carrier of modern intelligence. It proved that in the era of hybrid warfare, survival belongs to the innovators. So tell me, if one jet, one pilot, and one bomb can silence an army's eyes, what do you think comes next? Make sure to like, share, and subscribe, because this war is just beginning.